Hi, thanks for watching. Okay, so in this video, continuing with the Chad Daybell trial. Okay, in this video, I want to really focus on the big question of how Tammy Daybell died. How did she die?
Asphyxia could be from chemical asphyxia. Such things like cyanide can cause an asphyxial death because it blocks the oxygen getting to the tissues.
One way to suffocate someone could be to put a plastic bag over their head. Would that cause asphyxiation?
Yes.
Okay, I think we can all admit this is problematic because I think we can all admit that the coroner, the local coroner, did a very bad job of making a decision as to what to do with Tammy's body when the evidence was fresh. Okay, that said, we still have clues, and that's all we have is clues. So we have to make the best inferences we can.
Your dad ever talked to you about death percentages?
Yes.
Did your dad ever talk to you about people being close to death?
Yes.
Do you recall any specific people your dad talked to you about being close to death?
Yes.
And who was that?
Well, my mom was one of the people.
And so today I'd like to really analyze the testimony of Emma, her husband, Mr. Murray, and then the defense pathologist. That's the Dr. Raven. Okay, and then continuing on, analyzing a little more about Emma and the way she describes her father's religious beliefs.
And he wanted to stick to as close as the original form as he could. So he was really interested in teachings from Joseph Smith and Brigham Young and similar early leaders of the church.
Just kind of try to tie that all together to see if we can sort of get some idea, because honestly, we don't really have conclusive evidence of exactly how she died.
As a forensic pathologist, would you agree that you approach an autopsy more like a doctor as you're looking for symptoms, causes?
Well, we are a doctor, so we do look for scientific evidence of a diagnosis. Again, we don't speculate on diagnoses. We say this is a gunshot wound because we have evidence of the gunshot wound. We have hemorrhage. We have a knife wound.
Okay, so before we get into the deep dive, I want to make a comment about this Dr. Raven. Okay, I think she's very misleading. She's conflating and she's confusing the terms cause of death with manner of death. Okay, diagnosis, you don't know what she means when she says diagnosis. Does she mean cause of death or does she mean manner of death? Okay, scientifically, we know for sure the cause of death, Tammy's cause of death is asphyxia. Okay, and she's playing games. She's playing a little shell game because she's trying to confuse the manner of death with the cause of death. And she uses that word diagnosis because diagnosis is an ambiguous word that could refer to the cause of death or the manner of death. All right. So I'm surprised that that the prosecution let her get away with that ambiguity. They should have pinned her down and said, "You do know the cause of death. You do know the cause of death. The cause of death was asphyxia. Admit that you know that or deny that that's the cause of death," right?
So again, yes, we use scientific evidence to base our diagnoses off of, like any doctor does.
And this is where I really disagree with Dr. Raven. And I really hope the prosecution gets rebuttal witnesses who are pathologists, okay, who can kind of clarify what's wrong with Dr. Raven, right? And I'm just going to let you guys know, for full disclosure, my father is a professor of pathology, just to let it out there. My father has been a forensic pathologist, and he's also been an anatomic and autopsy pathologist, okay? And so when we're talking about a forensic pathologist, they're not just like doctors, okay? They're not just medical doctors, okay? They are medical doctors who get additional training in legal medicine, okay? So they can connect it to the legal consequences of a death investigation, right? So that's exactly why they're not regular anatomic pathologists, okay? If you're an actual forensic pathologist, you're able to make inferences based on circumstances and context in a legal setting. Okay, so this doctor is actually really, I think, kind of misrepresenting what a forensic pathologist really does.
Again, we always base it off scientific evidence, what we have in front of us, the autopsy. Either we have a cause of death or we don't. We try not to speculate. We try not to guess on what a cause of death is. There's lots of implications to that for anybody.
Except that here we do have a definitive cause of death. The cause of death is asphyxia. Okay, so she's really playing games. The question here is the manner of death, not the cause of death.
So generally speaking, it is bias if that's what you're using to determine a cause of death.
She's almost using like the anatomic pathologist's point of view from like say a hospital autopsy pathologist, and she's trying to apply that to forensic pathology. Forensic pathology, you can make reasonable inferences. Okay, now I agree. Okay, you may be able to put that the manner of death is inconclusive, right? But you can still talk in your autopsy report about possibilities, right? And there's no doubt that she died of asphyxia. So the asphyxia part we understand. And then she can just put in the autopsy report, look, given the circumstances, there could be suspicion and could be increased probability that this was caused by, let's say, a person as opposed to, like, say, some medical event, right? And then it's up to the police to fill in the gaps and to carry on the death investigation, right? But she's really, I think, misleading the jury as to what a forensic pathologist is. All right. Anyway, let's get into actually figuring out how Tammy died, right? So let's us look at the actual circumstances from the little we can gather from these very conservative witnesses, right? So let's look at Mr. Murray. This is Emma Daybell's husband, right? And he actually witnessed Tammy on the day before, or I should say the hours leading up to when she supposedly died, right? So let's see what Mr. Murray has to say.
When you went in to see Tammy, did you observe anything unusual?
Um, earlier in the day, she was exhausted, but
All right,
she
now,
seemed more
I want you to
exhausted.
stop there. How did you describe her appearance at that point?
She seemed exhausted and exasperated.
And exasperated for what reason?
She just didn't seem like she was feeling well.
Okay.
She seemed really worn out.
Okay, here, this is interesting, okay, because she's described as being sort of worn out and exhausted, right? Exhausted and exasperated, right? So there's a little bit of an emotional observation. For right now, since all of these family witnesses have basically described Tammy as having symptoms of depression, that exasperated might just mean that she's just in a damn bad mood and she's tired, and maybe they're interpreting it through this prism of wanting to save Chad. But really what they were observing is somebody who's just exasperated, in a bad mood, and is just not having a good day. That's one possibility. The other possibility is maybe she was exhausted. Okay, but how could that help us understand an asphyxia death, right? If somebody is really feeling exhausted, that might be a sign they have cardiac problems. But we already know from the autopsy, her heart looked just fine. Okay, it was just the lungs, right? It was just a very local to the lungs asphyxia. That's already kind of suspicious. So that raises the issue, and this is so sad. To me, it raises the issue of microdosing. Okay, we already saw another case in Colorado recently with a dentist named James Craig, who poisoned his wife Angela Craig, right? And by coincidence, they're Mormons, right? This James Craig was also a Mormon. So I don't know. I'm already starting to wonder about microdosing, and this is just one reason more for me to feel so irritated with the coroner, because they missed that golden opportunity to at least try to examine Tammy's body when the evidence was fresh. Although, if Chad was very clever and he really microdosed her, I'm not sure that would have been detectable, because this is the thing about cyanide. Very low doses of cyanide, they dissipate super quickly from the body. And so it might never have been detectable. So that's the sad part, but let's just keep listening.
Okay. She seemed very worn out.
Correct.
She had been working lifting boxes all day.
Correct.
At some point later in the evening, did you have a chance to visit with her?
Yes, when I brought the keys back.
Okay. And what did you observe at that point?
She was sitting on the couch, and she seemed very exhausted, like I said from earlier, but then was coughing pretty hard.
Okay. Was there any indication that she appeared that she was sick or that she was having any other symptoms?
No.
Okay, so this part does confuse me a little bit, okay? Because even if you are microdosing cyanide, okay, the main effect of cyanide is to cause some level of your body's inability to absorb oxygen, right? So your oxygen saturation is going to go down, right? So even if you're microdosing the cyanide, it's not just going to be that you're going to feel tired, okay? It's more going to be you're going to be feeling dizzy, like woozy, right? And that doesn't seem to be what he's describing. He seems to be describing, first of all, her feeling tired during the day, which that could be the depression, right? Or it could be microdosing of something, right? And then later he just describes her as just coughing really hard and not feeling well, but not necessarily the idea that she's woozy or dizzy. So that to me makes me wonder if maybe Chad found some kind of toxin that he knew would be undetectable that might cause some problem just in the lungs. And that might explain the Alex Cox as well. I'm just going to throw this out there. I don't know a lot, and I haven't done a lot of research. And this one, I'm just guessing. But maybe there's some kind of hormonal supplements. I know there are some contraceptive pills. And so there are some contraceptive hormones that are known to cause or at least increase the risk of blood clots in the lung. I'm not sure the mechanism. But maybe it could be that maybe Chad found something. I don't know. Maybe it was some kind of hormonal thing that he was giving her a lot of, and maybe just kind of hoping eventually it would cause some kind of problem. And maybe that's what Alex was also taking. Maybe it was like this bizarre suicide where they would just take all this hormone basically, and then just wait until something happened. Now, that sounds so horrible. I don't even know if I believe that, but I'm just throwing that out there. But maybe there's some other substance that could cause, some kind of problem with clotting. That sounds like such a cruel way to kill somebody. So right here, I'm gonna have to say that even I'm a little confused. Okay, I'm honestly a little bit confused, because I would think if she was really taking even a microdose of cyanide, I would think the main symptom would be wooziness, uneasiness, dizziness, and I'm not picking that up. So even I'm confused here, and this is assuming that this Mr. Murray is telling the truth. But anyway, I'm gonna leave this a little bit open, and I'm sorry. I wish I had a better opinion, but I think here the appropriate response to Mr. Murray is to be a little confused, because it doesn't really look like cyanide, and I'm not really sure what toxin would cause those symptoms. So I'm a little confused. Anyway, let's move on to Emma, okay? Because I think there's a little bit of leakage in what she says about Chad's religious beliefs that might at least help us with the motive.
When you say the power of the priesthood, what do you mean by that?
The power of God given by the laying on of hands.
Is that something that has to be specially endowed upon something, or is that some sort of patriarchal role that someone gets as head of a family household?
Any eligible man can have it
Okay.
if they're living and keeping covenants in the church.
This is very, very important, because in order for Emma to believe that her father has the priesthood power, okay, she has to believe that he is keeping the true covenants of the true church. All right. And what we're never going to find out in this superficial examination is, what does Emma think are the true teachings of the church? Okay. Now, she says she differs from her father, but she never says that she's absolutely mainline LDS, right? So we don't know if Emma doesn't believe in some form or some variation of polygamy. Okay. We don't know that, but we'll see that later on she'll talk about how her father wanted to adhere very, very closely to Brigham Young and to Joseph Smith and to other early leaders.
And he wanted to stick to as close as the original form as he could. So he was really interested in teachings from Joseph Smith and Brigham Young and similar early leaders of the church.
And so that opens the door. And I think a better cross-examination would have really penetrated into her, what she thinks about polygamy, although I'm sure she would have denied it, right? Or whether she believes in any kind of variation of polygamy, right? So that might explain why Chad could cheat on Tammy and yet still have the priesthood power. Let's just keep that in our minds.
Okay. And on issues of covenants in the church, your father's not a perfect person, is he?
No,
And you're aware of a relationship that had been going on, and I'm not trying to embarrass you or cause you some difficulty, but you did subsequently learn that your father had a relationship with another woman,
yes,
and that was not an appropriate relationship.
it was not.
Okay. And at this point, it was, for all practical purposes, having a relationship with Lori Vallow while still being married to your mother.
That's correct.
Okay, here, to me, this is very important, okay, because here and in other places, okay, Emma basically is very open that she realizes that her father had this physical relationship with somebody else, right? But she doesn't seem too mortified. She doesn't seem too mortified. So that makes me wonder whether Emma doesn't subscribe or believe privately in some variation of polygamy. Maybe not the way it appeared in the 19th century, but if maybe she doesn't believe in some exception where certain privileged people can engage in something that looks like polygamy, okay? And I say this because this may open the door to where Emma is not really a mainline LDS, and she may just be pretending to be outraged by her father's cheating. And I think there's another part of the testimony where she's questioned, of whether she believes that cheating on a wife would violate the covenants. And she says, yes, it would violate. But I think she may be taking advantage of the ambiguity, because maybe what Emma is doing is openly saying it would violate today's mainline LDS covenants, right? But maybe privately, Emma believes in a more fundamental version, maybe not the same as Chad, but maybe Emma believes in some more fundamental version where for certain translated beings, they could end up engaging in what appears to be polygamy, okay, but that there would be some explanation because they're becoming translated, right? So we don't know that. And the prosecution didn't really dive into Emma to really tease that out. So we really don't know. But the reason I'm raising these issues is because polygamy is not the only controversial issue from way back in Brigham Young and Joseph Smith's times, right? There's another issue from those times, and where Emma says, you know, she liked Brigham Young and Joseph Smith, and she said other leaders. I then have to wonder, honestly, if maybe Chad doesn't privately have like good feelings about people like Porter Rockwell, okay, and other influential Mormons who were very big into killing, okay. And what I mean by that is in the old LDS days, okay, there was a thing called blood atonement, and basically there was some theories going on or some doctrines going on in the Mormon Church that you could be sufficiently bad, you could be sufficiently dark, okay, that let's say that Jesus couldn't save you, basically, that you had to have your blood spilled, and that, you know, just atonement through Jesus would not save your soul, right? So if Chad believes in anything like that, along with all the multiple probations and all this other stuff, you know, he may think that some people can become so possessed and so negative that they're essentially like the Walking Dead. And maybe Emma doesn't use the word zombie because maybe Chad doesn't use the term zombie with Emma, but maybe in other words, using other language, maybe Emma would also believe that maybe some people are so bad, like the old fundamentalists used to believe back in the 19th century, that some people could be so bad that not even atonement through Jesus Christ could actually save you, and that you had, you know, blood would have to spill basically to save your soul.
And at this point, as a result of casting out the spirits, does that mean that after they cast the spirits out, you die?
No,
Is there any instant that you can recall in your teachings as part of the fundamental or LDS church where by casting out a spirit, the result is someone dies?
no, the goal of it is so that way you have your own body back and can be in control of yourself.
Okay, so I agree that for Emma, the goal is not to kill people. The goal when casting out is that the person can recover. But if you press Emma further, she may personally believe or sympathize with Chad's belief in an old 19th century, let's say more antiquated fundamentalist doctrine, where the goal is to save people, but with some people that are so dark, maybe for those people there is no salvation except through being rid of your body so you can go have a better chance in another probation. And I think, you know, unfortunately the prosecution hasn't penetrated down into Emma to see if maybe there's a little corner of her doctrine where maybe she sees an exception to the rule. You know, the rule is that you're not supposed to die when you get something cast out, but I still don't know whether she doesn't have a little exception to the rule for those people that are sufficiently dark or sufficiently possessed.
Your dad ever talk to you about death percentages?
Yes,
Did your dad ever talk to you about people being close to death?
yes,
Do you recall any specific people your dad talked to you about being close to death?
yes.
And who was that?
Well, my mom was one of the people, but it was not death so much as how connected your spirit was to your body. My mom would feel lightheaded and say she didn't feel quite connected to herself, and they would reconnect her spirit to her body.
So here is where I would wager that Emma is being on the border of being dishonest and perjuring herself. I mean, you know, she'll happily perjure herself, because I'm sure for Emma, you know, the laws of Idaho to her are apostate laws. You know, she probably looks at the Idaho legal system like a bunch of apostates. And when you're dealing with Gentiles and apostates, I think if you're in some regressed form of Mormonism, where you're like in a regressed 19th century version of fundamentalist Brigham Young version, I'm sure, you know, Brigham Young went to war against the United States, right? I mean, let's be honest. So I'm sure that, you know, if Emma is sufficiently sympathetic with a very old fashioned, you know, LDS or Mormon, whatever ideology, you know, I don't think she really cares about perjuring herself, because she's in an apostate she's in either there are apostates and there are Gentiles running the Idaho legal system. So I'm sure for her, it's just fair game, like the Scientologists, right? It's like that. So I think what's really going on here is she's admitting that there was talk about Tammy being on the death scale, basically, and having that darkness. And, obviously, the rule, and not the exception would be that you're trying to put people back in their body. All right. But I think what Emma is avoiding is that, yeah, that's the rule, but what's the exception to the rule? Okay. The exception to the rule is maybe Tammy was getting really, really dark. And if she only had access to those text messages where basically Chad is saying that she's inhabited by Viola, this demon, and there's basically no more Tammy. And Chad said that he was in touch with Tammy on the other side, that the actual Tammy had actually gone on and there was nothing left in her body, right? So at that point, you don't even need a blood atonement because that body doesn't even have Tammy. Tammy's already gone, right? So at that point, you don't even need to spill the blood. That's just a dead body inhabited by some other spirit.
Would it be fair to describe your father as a fundamental?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. And you didn't share his religious beliefs?
Not necessarily.
Okay. Some of them you were.
Yes.
Okay, so here's my speculation. My speculation is that Emma may not have shared 100%, but I think she shared a lot of Chad's ideas. And I think Emma, in her own way, she's pretending, she's sort of holding herself out as being like, she's holding herself out as being sort of consistent with mainline LDS, but I think privately she also has old-fashioned LDS ideas, right? Old-fashioned Mormon ideas, okay? I think Emma probably agrees with Chad. I'm just speculating, but this is my speculation, all right? I think she probably agrees with Chad that you can be so negative and so dark that maybe you're not even a human anymore. You're just inhabited by some alien spirit, basically, okay? And so my wager is that I don't know what they've talked about. I don't know what Chad's talked about, but I think somehow the daughter's gotten the message that Chad was very patient with Tammy, that Tammy held on for a long, long time, and she was very patient. And I think she probably feels sorry for Chad because Chad had to deal with the burden of having this spouse that was slowly losing herself and becoming less and less a human, basically. Okay. And I think in this twisted religious ideology, I think Emma probably just feels sorry for her dad for having to even put up with it. Okay. And I think she also probably considers that maybe because she and Lori were on some other level and because Tammy was exiting, I think that in some way, just because of her sympathy to the old-fashioned, LDS ideologies, I think Emma probably feels it was okay for Chad to go ahead and get sealed in the temple with Lori, especially if she believes that they were together in past lives. Okay. So that now Tammy becomes kind of a subordinate spouse, almost in this sort of polygamous sort of cosmos. You know what I mean? And to draw a connection with the recent photos of Emma, where you see the transformation, where she looks less like Tammy and more like Lori, okay? And because Emma used to be very sympathetic with Julie Rowe back in the days, that's a known fact. They were on very sympathetic terms. Okay, Emma's probably a lot more sophisticated than she appears. She may be pulling a little of that Zulema thing, where she's using the appearance of naivete as a cover for a very sophisticated ideology, right? Emma may believe, a la Julie Rowe and all that kind of stuff, with her own version of like old-fashioned Mormonism that she's hiding, that she's privately keeping to herself. She may believe that she was born to Tammy, but that really in the old generations, going way back, she may believe that she's really Lori's child. She may even have that belief. So I wouldn't even discount that maybe Emma feels like she's more legitimately Lori's daughter, if you can believe that. But I just leave that out there. And I think even if she doesn't share 100% of Chad's ideas, I think she believes that therefore Chad retained the priesthood. Okay. And that despite being with Lori, even though she'll pretend not to condone it, I think she privately believes that Chad maintained his priesthood and maintained his covenants, even though he was with Lori. Okay, I think that's what she probably believes. And I think she probably believes that her mother was sort of on the way out in this spiritual sense. Okay, so what do I really think happened? Okay, what I think happened, to be quite honest, okay, I don't know what happened, but here's my idea of what may have been happening. Okay, maybe, possibly, Chad was microdosing. Maybe he was microdosing Tammy, but maybe not with the same substances. Okay. Maybe he was using one substance to sort of make her kind of tired. And then maybe when he was satisfied, when Chad was satisfied that that Tammy was no longer not even 1% in her body, that she was completely on the other side, and that her body was only inhabited by Viola or whatever. I'm just humoring Chad a bit. But when Chad was completely satisfied, and maybe he was helping her along the way by giving her some microdose of some toxin, okay? But when Tammy reached a point of just being exhausted, and on top of that, I think at this point, I think Tammy was suspecting Chad and maybe even confronting him. So it's a combination of maybe being microdosed by some toxin, maybe being depressed, maybe also discovering that Chad had been cheating, and maybe even confronting him. I think Chad finally got to a point where that's it. There's no more Tammy here. This is just Viola, right? So I personally believe that Chad was very solemn about his priesthood. I think that's why he didn't divorce Tammy, because he didn't want to be on bad terms with Jesus Christ. I think this is how crazy Chad is, all right? In a way, Chad trying to be on good terms with Jesus Christ, that's why Tammy died, because she could have just divorced and gotten out of there, right? So the reason why he didn't divorce her, and I think the reason why he thinks he's keeping the priesthood, is because he's being very careful about when to release Tammy's body, right? He's very scrupulous about it. He takes forever, even with Lori. He wants to be with his goddess Lori, but even the goddess Lori has to wait while Chad makes sure, absolutely sure, that Tammy is completely gone and that it's only Viola, right? And so I think Chad was very scrupulous and very concerned about his own salvation, right? And maintaining his own priesthood. So he probably waited very carefully until Tammy was just completely depressed, exasperated, complaining, sick, and also confronting him probably, right? And so it finally got to a point where even Chad, in his sacred, scrupulous manner, was totally satisfied that Tammy was gone. And then at that point, I think he added another drug. Okay. And I think the reason why is because Chad is such a coward. He's such a coward. He won't manhandle anybody. Chad doesn't have the guts and he just doesn't have the courage to physically grab and kill somebody. He's too much of a weakling. So I think he probably added another drug to make Tammy really get sick, but he probably is smart because Chad has worked in the death industry. He's probably studied so much about death. We probably don't even know how much Chad knows about death. And he probably knew from all of his being fascinated with the death industry, he probably knew that there's a certain level of cyanide where if you just let the body hold for 6 hours, it'll dissipate so that they'll never detect it on an autopsy. So he probably added some cyanide at the end after Mr. Murray left the house, right? Murray is gone. And so Chad probably added some cyanide to whatever he was giving Tammy, and then got her where she's very disabled. And that's probably where Alex came in. And I think they put a plastic bag over her head. That's what I think. The plastic bag is the only way to explain. And there's no damage to the nose, to the face. There's no petechia in the eye. And there's no sign of actual manual strangulation, right? So the only thing that can make, if he gave her a mega dose of cyanide, I just don't think Chad has the guts to do that, because that would be very risky, right? Because if you give her too much cyanide, that would be detectable, and even the coroner would smell it. You can smell cyanide, right? So I think he gave her a very tactical dose of cyanide, and to be very careful, because Chad is so careful, he probably held the body for 6 hours to let the cyanide dissipate. That's what I think. That's what I think he did. But I think he was very scrupulous about it. And I think he was following scrupulously his beliefs from back in the 19th century, because back in the 19th century, there were certain avenging angels and, what do they call them? Just destroyer angels, these Danites, these old Mormons that would actually kill ex-Mormons. This is the truth. And so I think that, if he's really steeped in this old-fashioned 19th century version of Brigham Young Mormonism, I think Chad probably feels there are some apostates and people that are so dark and people that are essentially not even in their own body that it's just not a problem to kill them. If anything, you're doing them a favor so that their spirit can be free in the next world. So I think that Chad had no problem whatsoever when he was satisfied that Tammy was no longer in her body. I don't think he had any problem, giving her just a tactical dose of cyanide, bringing Alex in to assist him, holding her arms while they put a plastic bag over her head. Okay. And then once she was dead, I think Chad slept perfectly soundly next to her dead body for 6 hours. I think he was perfectly comfortable sleeping right next to her because he was just satisfied he had done the priestly duty, that he had the priesthood, that being with Lori did not take away his priesthood, that he did something very nice to Tammy by letting her be free so she can now be free and busy in another world. Okay. And I think he slept next to her in complete peace. okay? And he waited because he needed 6 hours because he wanted that cyanide to go down, because he doesn't want the apostate law enforcement, the Gentile law enforcement, to give him a hard time afterwards. He's very clever, just like those old 19th century Mormons were very clever with the United States authorities, right? I think Chad was also very clever with the law enforcement to make sure he gave a dead body in the morning that would no longer have really meaningfully detectable levels of cyanide. So that's pretty much what I think he did. And I think that Emma, she may not agree with everything, but I think she sympathizes with Chad. I think she agrees with enough of it that I think she probably feels she's Lori's child, maybe, possibly. And she probably feels like that really Tammy was just a subordinate spouse, that really in the grander scheme, Lori is the real spouse, okay? And that Chad probably just put up with a lot of hard times from Tammy, and that she was just a pain in the ass to the end. And then in the end, he probably just did her a solemn favor within the priesthood, and that Chad, it really, we'll never understand it because we're just Gentiles and apostates, but they understand it, and it makes sense to them. And now they just have to put up with this sham of Gentile justice while the priest is put to death, or in Idaho, nobody will ever get. He'll never get executed, but put on death row. And by the way, death row is probably the safest place for Chad, to be quite honest. But anyway, that's my way of understanding how I think Tammy died, and why I think Emma is not very mortified about it. So anyway, appreciate your patience, and thanks for watching.